Almanac with Judy Mock and Mike Gray.
Good evening. Welcome to our show. Tonight we're on the beach near Emerald Isle.
This time of year, the surf along our coast becomes a playground for people from all over.
But beginning in June, our coastline also becomes vulnerable to those fickle, destructive cyclones that spawn down in the tropics, the hurricanes.
Few people who live along our coast today have ever experienced a major hurricane, and these newcomers just don't know what to expect.
So for the next 2 weeks in our series, In the Path of Destruction, we'll take a look at how our people and their property might fare during the next major storm.
To give you an idea of what we mean, tonight we'll take a look at the last major storm to strike our coast.
On the morning of October 15th, 1954, she came ashore just south of here, packing 150-mile-an-hour winds and pushing a 17-foot wall of water. She is known as the Great Hurricane Hazel.
Hazel is first spotted as a small hurricane in the southeastern Caribbean on October 5th. Her life will span 17 days. She'll cover thousands of miles from the tropics to the Arctic Circle, and those who experience her fury will never forget it. The warm Caribbean and favorable winds quickly fuel Hazel into a monster storm. Early on October 12th, she sweeps across Haiti, killing hundreds and destroying millions in crops. Regaining strength, she turns northwestward toward the mainland. Hurricane Hunter aircraft report barometric pressure is dropping. Winds are up to 150 miles an hour. Flights into the storm are canceled. It's just too dangerous. By the evening of October 14th, Hazel is roaring down on the Brunswick County beaches at 35 miles an hour. Because of her rapid movement, weather reports are sketchy. Many people along the coast don't realize how close the storm is. One worried local official takes matters into his own hands.
And I said, well, there's only one thing to do. The radio didn't tell us much. I'll call Mr. Gordon Dunn down in Miami. He's the chief hurricane hunter for the East Coast, and maybe he can enlighten us. So I got on the telephone and called down to Miami, and I want to speak to Mr. Gordon Dunn. Well, in a few minutes, the phone answered and said, my name's Dunn, what can I do for you? I said, well, I live in Wrightsville Beach, North Carolina, and I'm mayor here, and I want to know whether we're going to have a storm through here or not, because I got a lot of responsibility for the people. He said, never heard of it. I said, well, you know where North Carolina is? He said, yeah, I know where North Carolina is. Well, I said, go due east and then go far south as you can and find Wilmington, North Carolina. He said, I got my finger on it. I said, well, Wrightsville Beach is 10 miles east. He said, great God, man, you're dead. So I said, evacuate the beach.
9 a.m., Friday, October 15th. Hazel rages ashore. Her storm tides and screaming winds pound the coast for over 120 miles, from Myrtle Beach to Wrightsville. The storm centers on Holden and Long Beaches near Southport. 7 people will die here. Miraculously, a few survive, including 17-year-old Connie Leggett, who's on her honeymoon.
In early morning, about 7 o'clock, we were awakened by severe winds and more rain, and knew that we must do something. In the attempt to leave the island, our car was flooded, and also the family Jeep was flooded, so then we started out on foot, approaching a 2-story apartment house about half a block away. When we reached the apartment house, the water was already waist deep on us, and so we immediately went upstairs and broke in to the upstairs apartment, thinking that we would be safe from the storm. Later on in the day, as everything around us had been demolished and was either floating away or torn apart, we realized that we must then prepare ourselves for the inevitable, which was that the house we were in was going to be destroyed. So we looked around for something to use as a life raft. So in desperation, and in seeing that there were several mattresses and other large pieces of furniture floating around outside from other houses that had been destroyed, we then proceeded to take a mattress off of a nearby bed and put it out of the window. At that time, the water from the storm was at a level just below the window casing of the second story of this house. And we could hear the dishes in the downstairs apartment falling around. We could also feel the water under the floor and knew that pretty soon we were going to have to make an escape from this house. When a calm period came, we did just that. We put a mattress out. I could not swim. My husband could swim, so therefore I'm the person who got on the mattress. He never did get on the mattress. He jumped in the water and held onto the side, and by some quirk of fate, a 2-foot section, I would say, of the downstairs outer wall was ripped out, and it floated up within arm's reach of us. He grabbed that, pulled himself up on it, and then pulled the corner of the mattress up on him, and that gave us a little bit more buoyancy. So we just held on and went where the winds and the water took us, and it was not where we had planned to go, because we found out later that it was during the eye of the storm that we had put the mattress in the water. So we went the opposite direction. And we were caught up in the tops of some tall oak trees back on the banks of what we know as Davis Creek. And we stayed there for the remainder of the storm, which was 2 to 3 hours more, I suppose. When the storm left and the water subsided, we then proceeded to climb down out of our trees and off our mattress and wade across as much as we could of the creek, and then onto the mainland, only to find devastation and no sign of life until we eventually met people coming on to survey the damage of the storm.
Connie likens the devastation to a scene from a 50s science fiction movie. This film of Long Beach, where 7 died, was taken by a Wilmington news crew just after the storm. The property destruction on Oak Island was complete. Of 350 beach homes, the shells of only 5 remain. The rest were lifted off their foundations and washed away. At nearby Southport, Hazel scuttled the entire fishing fleet, along with several canneries. She wrecked every fishing pier along 170 miles of coastline. Between Holden and Myrtle, the destruction lessens, but the houses you're seeing are on the second row from the ocean. Hazel devoured hundreds of yards of beach, the entire dune line, and all the front row beach houses for hundreds of miles.
In addition to the high winds, hurricanes produce a storm surge. This is an increase in sea level. In 1954, when this community was affected by Hurricane Hazel, the storm surge increased sea level 17 feet above normal, which would be approximately the height of this telephone pole behind me. If we traced out a 3-foot square and extended a column to the top of that storm surge, the water within this column alone would have weighed 10,000 pounds. It was the force of this water which washed away dunes, washed away houses, and drowned people during Hurricane Hazel.
Striking the mainland didn't spend Hazel's fury. She quickly roared through eastern North Carolina, blowing down trees, power lines, flooding streams and rivers. During her 5-hour rampage across the state, Hazel killed 19 people and injured 200. She destroyed $125 million in property. Crossing into Virginia, she dumped a foot of rain in places. Heavy flooding hit Pennsylvania and western New York. Just 12 hours after raging ashore, Hazel raced across Lake Ontario. Over 100 Canadians died from flooding. There was also $100 million in property damage. The weakened storm was last reported somewhere north of Sweden on October 21st. Hazel's 17-day path of destruction was finally over. Back on the North Carolina beaches, people stunned by the storm returned to what's left of their property. Highway patrolmen from as far away as Asheville, along with National Guardsmen, keep thousands of sightseers off the beaches. To prevent looting, Wrightsville Beach is sealed off and a curfew ordered. It'll take months, in some cases years, before many of these people will feel safe enough living beside the ocean to rebuild. In many ways, Hazel and the other hurricanes that followed in 1955 were a warning, a reminder that no matter how complacent we become, the threat of destruction is always out there. Has the lesson been forgotten?
Well, I would say in general that probably most people who live along the coastline today don't really appreciate the full dangers of an intense hurricane, like Hazel in 1954. We have a tendency to exaggerate our past experience if it wasn't an extreme one. If you went through Hazel, I don't have to worry about you. But a lot of other people have gone through weaker storms. Now they think they know what it's all about, and because of these false impressions, they make poor decisions.
It's been nearly 28 years since Hurricane Hazel ravaged this section of the North Carolina coast. When the next Hazel will come is anybody's guess, but it's a certainty another storm like her will come ashore. What has hurricane experts worried is that because of the rampant coastal development, coupled with the thousands of new people who've moved here, the next hurricane could prove to be a catastrophe. And next week on Almanac, we'll take a look at how vulnerable we really are, living in the path of destruction. Last week, in part one of our hurricane preparedness series, you saw the devastation Hazel inflicted on North Carolina in 1954. Tonight, the conclusion of our hurricane series, In the Path of Destruction.
We're here along the Bogue Banks, the 25-mile-long barrier island stretching from Morehead City to Emerald Isle, and one of the fastest-growing coastal communities in the state.
It's this high-density development, coupled with the dramatic increase in population, that has hurricane experts worried. Dr. Neil Frank, the director of the National Hurricane Center, says we're more vulnerable to a major storm today than ever before. And in fact, the East Coast could experience a tragedy worse than the 1900 Galveston storm, in which 6,000 people were killed.
To prevent that kind of calamity, all of us who enjoy our coast need to know when and where an approaching hurricane will come ashore. And that, we learned, is the most difficult forecast of all.
Well, hurricane forecasting is still very difficult because the atmosphere is so complex. When the eye of a hurricane moves along, it wobbles like a top. It'll wobble to the right for a few hours, wobble back to the left for a few hours, and that's what it makes it so difficult then to pinpoint the landfall. This is particularly true along the middle eastern part of the United States, the Carolinas. As storms turn north, they historically have a tendency to begin to increase in their forward speed, like Hazel did in 1954, and that only enhances the problem.
When a hurricane approaches the North Carolina coast, much of the responsibility for tracking it rests with the staff at the National Weather Service office in Wilmington. The station's radar can monitor a storm up to 250 miles at sea. Hour-by-hour readings establish its size, speed, and direction of travel. Heavy rain patterns and tornado conditions are watched closely. If a severe hurricane curves toward our coast and threatens to come ashore, the Wilmington Weather Office, with help from the National Hurricane Center in Miami, will issue an evacuation advisory.
Well, that's very, very difficult business because when you recommend evacuation, it's not only disruptive, but it's very costly to an area. And we take that with really a tremendous amount of consideration before any evacuation is recommended. But when we do recommend evacuation, we're really talking in a very serious vein. I think the thing that probably bothers me the most is, will somebody listen to what we're trying to tell them, what we're trying to convey to them? Because we're really kind of talking of guidance here that may make the difference between somebody surviving or not if they make the right decision at the right time.
It's hard to imagine the calamity that could occur when the next killer hurricane comes ashore. Hazel was considered a Class 4 storm, Class 5 being the worst. She killed 19 North Carolinians, mostly by drowning, and injured 200. Casualties were low because Hazel struck in October of '54, long after the tourists had gone home. But what about the next storm?
Another Hazel, like 1954, any place along the North Carolina coastline would create tremendous devastation.
Human loss of life, you think?
Well, it depends on whether human beings respond or not, on what kind of loss of life that there's going to be. And I just can't predict what's going to happen in that area.
Right after Hazel, it was said beachgoers would evacuate at the sign of a thunderstorm. But today, Hazel's lesson has been mostly forgotten. In 1979, here on Wrightsville Beach, Hurricane David grazed the coast. Police Chief George Antley says the beach was jammed with sightseers wanting a close-up look at a big storm. It's a summer weekend with a hurricane bearing down on the coast that has officials worried. On the 4th of July, Chief, how many people would you have on the beach and how long would it take to get them all off?
Well, we'd have, if you wanted to count day visitors, we'd have in the neighborhood of 25 to 30,000 people over here. Overnight people who the ones would be primarily evacuating, we would probably have 12 to 15,000 to get off the beach.
And how long would it take you to do it?
It would probably take us 6 or 7 hours to get that many people off.
Do you think all of them would leave? Would you force them off?
Well, that's another problem that we've got. We haven't had a hurricane in a long time, and a lot of people look at it as a party. And I don't know that how many of them would leave. I think the majority of them would leave, but I'm afraid you're always going to have that crowd that's going to look at a hurricane as a party and not leave, and they're probably going to be here when we get back, but not in the condition that we left them in.
What kind of party would it be for them, you think?
I'm afraid it'd be the last party they'd ever go to.
To help improve the public's understanding of hurricanes, especially among new beach residents, John Sanders, a coastal weather specialist with UNC Sea Grant, has been conducting a door-to-door survey.
With the University of North Carolina Sea Grant program.
Hi, Miss Stewart. Why don't you sit down, John?
Thank you, Miss Stewart. I'm conducting a survey on hurricanes, and I was wondering if you could answer a few questions.
I'll try.
Great. Mrs. Stewart, how long have you lived in the Caswell Beach area?
About 8 years.
Did you know about hurricanes before moving to this area?
Yes, I did.
Have you ever experienced a hurricane?
Hurricane Hazel.
Where were you when you...
Well, we were in Raleigh at that time.
Could you tell me a little bit about that storm?
Well, I'm embarrassed to say that I did not listen to the radio that day, as most of the other mothers did who evacuated their children from school in time. But I finally got mine as the trees were blowing back and forth and windows were breaking out.
Mrs. Stewart, would you do anything different if another hurricane should threaten?
Oh, yes, especially after having lived down here. And I know to listen to the different alerts, but of course we have the police who come around and evacuate us early down here.
Sanders is finding most beach residents have a healthy respect for hurricanes, but only a third of those surveyed understood the dangerous storm surge. The surge creates flooding, erodes the beach, and causes most of the hurricane deaths by drowning.
When the order comes to evacuate the beaches in advance of a hurricane, keeping traffic moving will be all important. A National Hurricane Center study estimates that to evacuate 100,000 people from a barrier island like our Outer Banks could take 36 hours. The problem, a hurricane warning, meaning the storm is coming ashore, is issued only 12 hours before it may strike. Another potential problem exists here on Bogue Banks, where there are only 2 roadways leading to the mainland. A bridge malfunction or an accident could jeopardize thousands of lives. To be ready for the unexpected, disaster planners along the coast have hurricane preparedness plans ready to go into effect.
We think we have a good plan, and what we really want to do is be sure that we take care of the people and can get them off the beach. We don't want any loss of life. We'll have to accept the fact that there'll be property damage and it'll be high. Homes are expensive, property's expensive, but they're better built, they're on piling, they're stronger. They've moved them back from the more exposed areas, but we'll have to take that as it comes. But as long as nobody gets hurt, we'll feel that we've had a successful implementation of our plans.
While most people hopefully will escape the beaches ahead of a hurricane, their beach houses and condos may not fare as well. In '54, Hazel wiped out all but 5 of 357 homes here on Long Beach. Today, There are about 2,000 homes in the same area.
Despite the recession, beach construction continues at a frenzied pace. Here along Bogue Banks, the number of new homes has doubled in 10 years. In the last 2 years, condos at Atlantic Beach have sprouted faster than sea oats. These condos are double-wide mobile homes, stacked 3 high and bolted together. They're constructed, according to local building codes, to withstand an 11-foot storm surge and winds of 110 miles an hour. Building inspectors are also enforcing the Coastal Management Act passed back in 1974. The law says all beach construction must be behind the dune line and out of flood-prone areas. But the law may be a question of too little, too late.
Well, and there's no question about the property loss. We're going to have tremendous damage in the next storm. In Frederick, 1979, on the Alabama coast, the loss was $2.3 billion. We're into the billion-dollar hurricanes, and that kind of a figure could certainly occur along the North Carolina coast.
During the 50s and 60s, most of the hurricanes hit the East Coast. In the 60s and 70s, they pounded the Gulf states. Neil Frank won't guess when a hurricane will return to North Carolina. The question, he says, is will we be ready?
Personal safety, of course, depends on you. If a hurricane is in the forecast, follow its track closely. Know where your local evacuation centers are, and if the evacuation order is given, leave early.
If you'd like your own hurricane safety checklist, just write us here at Almanac.
Here we are at Atlantic Beach, and we're going to be ready to eat soon. About an hour before you're ready to eat, you need to get the fire started. Because there's so much wind at the beach, it's a good idea to use a chimney of some sort to start the fire. This one is one that we've made out of just an old tin can that we put a series